Commander Yuna stood before the sealed door of Interrogation Room 7 and listened to the sound that should not exist. It drifted up through the ventilation shafts from the detention level below. A voice, singing, weak and rough but unmistakably defiant. She had been interrogating prisoners for 40 years. She had broken admirals and generals. She had shattered the will of creatures 3 times her size with armor thick enough to stop plasma rounds. She had reduced hardened warriors to weeping children, begging for mercy. In 4 decades of service to the Valkyrie Empire, she had never failed. Not once. But she had never heard a prisoner sing. The voice rose and fell in a melody she did not recognize. The words were in a human language, one of the dozens that species used across their scattered colonies. It did not matter that she could not understand the meaning. The tone said everything. It was not the sound of someone broken. It was not the sound of someone afraid. It was the sound of someone who refused to be silenced. Yuna's pale blue fingers tightened on the datapad in her hand. Her white eyes, which glowed softly in the dim corridor, narrowed with something that might have been confusion. Or perhaps the first cold touch of doubt. No, that was impossible. Doubt was weakness. And Commander Yuna had spent 40 years eliminating weakness wherever she found it. She turned away from the interrogation room door and walked toward the bridge, her boots clicking, sharp and precise on the metal floor. Her uniform was immaculate. Not a single crease marred the dark fabric. Not a single thread was out of place. Perfection in appearance reflected perfection in purpose. That was what she had always believed. That was what the Empire demanded. Behind her, faint through the walls and floors, the singing continued. 3 hours earlier, the battle had been brief and decisive. The Valkyrie warship Eclipse had been tracking the human convoy for 2 days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They had hidden in the shadow of an asteroid field, their engines cold, their hull reflecting nothing but the darkness of space. Patience was a weapon. Surprise was a weapon. And Commander Yuna wielded both with surgical precision. The human ships had been small commercial vessels. 5 cargo freighters escorted by 2 outdated defense craft that would have been museum pieces in any proper military fleet. They had been heading toward a human colony on the edge of explored space, carrying supplies and equipment. Standard civilian traffic. No threat, no challenge. That made them perfect. The Empire needed to understand these humans. They were a new species to the galactic stage, having discovered faster than light travel only a century ago. They were expanding rapidly, claiming worlds, and building colonies with a speed that made older civilizations nervous. The Valkyrie High Command wanted information. They wanted to know how easily these humans would break. They wanted to test their resolve before committing to larger operations. Commander Yuna had volunteered for the assignment. It would be simple work, clean work. The kind of operation that looked good in official reports. The Eclipse had struck without warning. The first freighter, a vessel called the Phoenix, had been closest to the asteroid field. It never had a chance to call for help. Plasma cannons tore through its engines in the opening seconds. The ship lurched sideways, trailing fire and frozen oxygen. Secondary explosions rippled down its hull as containment systems failed one after another. The other human ships scattered like frightened birds. The 2 defense craft tried to form a screen, buying time for the cargo ships to jump to faster than light speed. It was a brave attempt. Yuna would give them that much. But bravery without power was just another word for suicide. The Eclipse had destroyed both defense craft in under 3 minutes. The remaining freighters jumped away, leaving the Phoenix to its fate. The crippled ship tumbled slowly through the debris field, its hull breached in a dozen places, its crew either dead or dying. Yuna had ordered a scan for survivors, not because she cared, but because a living prisoner was more valuable than a corpse floating in vacuum. The sensors had found 1 life sign, 1 heartbeat among the ruins. The boarding team had gone in with weapons ready, expecting resistance. What they found instead was a woman in a torn cargo handler's uniform, trapped in what remained of the ship's loading bay. She was unconscious. Her left leg was bent at an angle that made even the hardened soldiers uncomfortable. Blood covered half her face from a wound on her head that should have killed her. But she was breathing. They had pulled her from the wreckage and brought her back to the Eclipse. Standard procedure. 1 prisoner was better than none, and a cargo handler might know shipping routes, colony locations, defense patterns. Small pieces of information that could be assembled into something useful. Yuna had barely glanced at the medical report when the prisoner had been delivered to the ship. Human female, approximately 30 cycles old by their counting. Multiple injuries including compound fracture of the left leg, severe concussion, extensive contusions, and lacerations. Stable but critical, expected to survive with treatment, expected to break even faster than most. The medical team had set the broken bone crudely just enough to prevent further damage. They had sealed the worst of the cuts and burns. They had done nothing for the pain. Pain was a tool, pain was leverage. And Commander Yuna was about to use it with expert precision. She had given him the prisoner 6 hours to wake up, 6 hours to realize where she was and what was coming, 6 hours to feel the fear settle into her bones alongside the agony of her injuries. Fear and pain were the foundation, everything else would build from there. When the guards had dragged the prisoner onto the bridge, Yuna had been reviewing tactical data at her command station. She barely looked up as the human was thrown to the floor in front of her. The sound of the body hitting metal was satisfying, solid. It was the sound of something breaking before the interrogation even began. The prisoner had tried to catch herself with her hands. Failed. Her broken leg had scraped across the floor as momentum carried her forward. The fractured bones had ground against each other inside the torn flesh. The femur, already shattered, had shifted with a sound like wet gravel. Yuna had looked up, then ready to see the scream, ready to see the tears, ready to hear the begging begin. The prisoner's jaw was locked shut. Her hands had formed fists so tight that her knuckles showed white through skin stained with dried blood. Sweat appeared on her forehead in an instant, trickling down through the grime and ash that covered her face. A vein stood out on her temple, pulsing hard and fast with the racing of her heart. Every muscle in her body had gone rigid with the shock of agony, but no sound came from her throat. Not a whimper, not a gasp, not even a breath that might have carried the weight of her pain. The bridge had gone silent. The crew at their stations had turned to watch. They had seen this moment dozens of times before. Prisoners always screamed when injured flesh met unforgiving metal. It was automatic, a reflex hardwired into every living thing. Pain that intense demanded a response. The body could not help itself. But this human made no sound. Yuna had slowly set down her datapad. She had stood from her command chair and walked across the bridge, her boots echoing in the sudden quiet. She had stopped directly in front of the prisoner and looked down at her with cold curiosity. The human had raised her head, slowly, with effort that made her whole body tremble. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the harsh lighting of the bridge. They were filled with pain. That much was obvious. The pain was enormous. The pain was overwhelming. The pain should have been unbearable, but there was something else in those eyes, something Yuna had not expected to see. It looked almost like anger, like defiance, like a challenge. Interesting. Yuna had crouched down, bringing herself to eye level with the prisoner. She had studied the human's face the way a scientist might study a specimen under examination, noting details, looking for weaknesses. The prisoner was young for her species, probably in her prime years. Her hair was dark brown, cut short and practical. Her skin was pale beneath the blood and dirt marked with old scars that suggested a life of physical work, or perhaps military service. Her hands were calloused. Her shoulders were broader than average for human females. She had the build of someone who had spent years carrying heavy loads and enduring hard labor. A cargo handler. That was what the identification chip in her torn uniform said. Tessa Callahan, crew of the civilian freighter Phoenix, no military rank listed, no security clearance, just a worker, a laborer, someone insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But those eyes were not the eyes of someone insignificant. Yuna had spoken in perfect English, one of the dozens of languages she had learned during her long career. Her voice had been calm, measured, the tone one might use when explaining something obvious to a child. "What is your name?" The prisoner had been silent for a long moment. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. Her whole body was shaking now, whether from pain or shock or both. But her eyes never left Yuna's face, never looked away, never showed the submission that prisoners were supposed to show. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough, damaged, but clear. "Callahan, Tessa, serial number 778-32-9941. Standard prisoner of war protocol, name and identification number only, nothing more." It was what military personnel were trained to say when captured. But this woman was supposed to be a cargo handler, a civilian. Yuna had allowed herself the smallest of smiles, not because she was amused, because she recognized what she was seeing. This human had military training, which meant she might know more than her simple job title suggested, which meant she might be valuable after all. A cargo handler, Yuna had said, slowly letting each word carry weight. Not a soldier, no, just a worker. Then you have no reason to protect military secrets. Tell me about your colony defenses. Tell me about your fleet positions. Tell me everything and I will make your death quick. The human had actually laughed. It was a broken sound, wet and painful, like something torn loose inside her chest. Blood had appeared at the corner of her mouth, trickling down her chin to drip onto the floor. I don't know any military secrets. I load boxes onto ships. That's all. Yuna had not believed her. Every prisoner said the same thing at first. They all claimed to know nothing. They all begged and lied and tried to save themselves. But in the end, they all broke. Every species broke. It was simply a matter of time and pressure. The right amount of pain applied at the right moment. The correct balance of hope and despair. She had stood towering over the prisoner again. She had nodded to her guards. Take her to detention. I will question her personally tomorrow. The guards had grabbed Tessa Callahan by the arms and dragged her toward the exit. Her broken leg had trailed behind her, useless and twisted. The fractured bone had scraped against the floor again. The sound was horrible, like something fundamental breaking, like the sound of structure giving way under impossible stress. Yuna had watched for the scream. She had waited for the cry of anguish that must surely come. She had been certain that this time the prisoner would not be able to contain it. No one had that much control. No one had that much strength. Tessa Callahan's jaw had tightened until the tendons in her neck stood out like cables. Her hands had made fists again. Her eyes had squeezed shut, but still no sound had escaped her lips. Not even a whimper. Not even a breath. The guards had dragged her off the bridge and into the corridor beyond. The door had sealed behind them with a hiss of pressurizing air. And for a long moment, Commander Yuna had simply stood there, staring at the drops of blood on her pristine floor. Something was wrong. Something was different about this prisoner. She could feel it in the cold space beneath her sternum, where doubt should not exist. She could sense it in the way her crew was avoiding her gaze. They had felt it too. That moment of wrongness. That instant when the universe failed to behave according to established patterns. Prisoners screamed. That was the rule. That was how interrogation worked. Break the body first. Make them understand that resistance meant suffering. Show them that compliance was the only path to relief. But this human had not screamed, and that Yuna realized as she returned to her command chair was going to be a problem. The detention level was exactly what it was designed to be. Cold, dark, hostile. The cells were small metal boxes with force field doors that hummed constantly with a sound just at the edge of hearing. A sound that burrowed into the brain and made sleep impossible. A sound that wore down the spirit before the interrogation even began. Yuna had designed these cells herself. She had studied the psychological effects of environment on prisoner morale, isolation, discomfort, the removal of hope. These were weapons as powerful as any blade or shock rod, sometimes more powerful. She stood now outside cell 7 and watched the prisoner through the shimmering barrier of the force field. Tessa Callahan had pulled herself into a sitting position against the far wall. It must have taken incredible effort. The broken leg was stretched out in front of her at an unnatural angle. The bone was clearly displaced in at least 2 places, maybe 3. The swelling had gotten worse. The skin was tight and discolored, dark purple spreading down toward the knee and ankle like spilled ink. The pain must have been extraordinary, constant, all-consuming, the kind of pain that made thinking difficult, that made anything except suffering impossible to focus on. But Tessa Callahan was not crying. She was not curled into a ball. She was not begging for medical attention through the force field. She was simply sitting there, breathing slowly, her eyes open, her expression distant but focused, as if she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere the pain could not quite reach. Yuna stepped closer to the force field. Her reflection shimmered in the energy barrier, distorted and ghost-like. She studied the prisoner in silence for a long moment before speaking. "You are strange for a human." Tessa's eyes shifted, found Yuna's face. There was no fear in them, just a kind of exhausted patience. "How many humans have you met?" Her voice was rough, damaged from the injuries, but steady. The question surprised Yuna. Prisoners did not usually ask questions. They answered them, or refused to answer them, but they did not turn interrogations into conversations. "You are the first," Yuna admitted. There was no harm in honesty. "Not about this." "Then how do you know I'm strange?" Yuna did not answer immediately. She did not like questions she could not answer. She did not like anything that made her feel uncertain. Certainty was control. Uncertainty was weakness. "The Empire has studied your species," she said instead. Her tone was firm, authoritative, the voice of someone who knew facts and understood truth. "We know that humans are weak. Your bodies break easily. Your minds break even easier. You will tell me everything I want to know." Tessa was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke again, and her words carried a weight that made Yuna lean closer despite herself. "Maybe. Maybe not. There is no maybe. There is only truth and pain." Yuna's voice had hardened. "I have broken admirals. I have broken generals. I have broken creatures 10 times your size, with 10 times your strength. A cargo handler will not resist me for long." The human shifted slightly. The movement caused obvious agony. Her face went pale. Sweat appeared on her forehead again. But her voice remained steady when she spoke. "My grandmother lived through a human war on our home planet. She was captured by the enemy when she was 20 years old." Yuna said nothing, did not interrupt. Something about the prisoner's tone demanded attention. "They kept her for 18 months. Did terrible things to her. Things I cannot describe." Tessa's eyes were far away now, seeing something Yuna could not see. She was a nurse, army nurse in World War II, captured during something we call the Battle of the Bulge, German prisoner of war camp. Cold, starvation, forced labor. She watched people die every day, watched friends freeze to death in their bunks. The prisoner paused, took a breath that clearly hurt. When the war ended, when the camp was liberated, she walked home. It took her 2 months. She had nothing, no food, no water, no shoes. But she walked. Through countries that had been bombed into ruins, through winter, through snow. And when she got home into Montana, she rebuilt her life. She married, she had children. She raised a family on a ranch in the mountains. She lived until she was 94 years old. Tessa's gaze returned to Yuna's face. Direct, unwavering. "Before she died, she told me something. She said, 'Tessa, darling girl, the body can suffer more than you think. The mind can suffer more than you imagine. But the spirit cannot be broken unless you allow it. Never allow it.'" Yuna felt something cold settle in her stomach. It was not fear. She did not feel fear. She was commander of the eclipse. She had spent 40 years eliminating fear from her life. But it was something close. Something that made her want to step back from the force field. Something that made her doubt for just a moment whether tomorrow's interrogation would go as planned. She pushed the feeling down, buried it, locked it away. "A nice story," she said. Her voice was colder now, harder. "We will see if it helps you." She turned and walked away. Behind her, she heard the prisoner shift again against the wall, heard her breathing slow and steady, did not hear crying, did not hear begging, did not hear any of the sounds that prisoners were supposed to make in the long dark hours before interrogation began. That night, Commander Yuna could not sleep. She lay in her quarters and stared at the ceiling and thought about the human in the cell below. She thought about the broken leg and the steady eyes. She thought about the grandmother who had walked home through a war zone with no shoes. She had interrogated hundreds of prisoners over her long career. She knew the signs of resistance. She knew the difference between a prisoner who would break quickly and one who would take time. She knew the smell of fear and the sound of desperation and the look of someone who was already defeated before the questioning even began. But she had never seen a prisoner who seemed so calm about what was coming, who seemed to understand exactly what would happen and simply accepted it. Not with resignation, not with surrender, but with something that looked almost like certainty, as if the outcome was already undecided, as if the prisoner had already won some private victory that had nothing to do with pain or survival. Una sat up in bed. She activated her personal console and pulled up the human's file. Read through it again, looking for something she had missed. Tessa Callahan, age 30, born in a place called Montana on Earth. Parents deceased when she was 8 years old. Raised by grandmother Margaret Callahan. Military service, age 18 to 24. Served in a human military organization called the Marine Corps. 2 deployments to war zones. Honorable discharge following injury. No details available on the nature of the injury. 5 years in civilian cargo logistics. No criminal record. No security flags. Nothing remarkable. Just an ordinary human. A worker. A survivor of a destroyed ship. So why did Una feel like she was missing something important? She closed the file and accessed the Empire's intelligence database on humanity. She had read these reports before. Everyone in the military had. Humans were a new species, recently arrived on the galactic stage, not particularly advanced, not particularly dangerous, worth monitoring, worth understanding, but not worth worrying about. The first entry was classification data, basic biological information. She skimmed past sections she had read dozens of times before. Average height, average weight, oxygen breathers, carbon-based, 2 sexes, live birth reproduction. Nothing unusual. Then she reached a section she had never paid much attention to before. She had glanced at it in the past and dismissed it as meaningless. But now in the dark of her quarters, with the memory of those steady brown eyes fresh in her mind, she read it carefully. Earth, human home planet, classification death world. Una stopped reading, looked at those 2 words, death world. It was a rare classification, reserved for planets that were extraordinarily dangerous, worlds where survival was not guaranteed, where evolution had to be violent and brutal and unforgiving to produce anything that could endure. The Empire had encountered only 3 death worlds in 5,000 years of expansion. The creatures that came from those worlds were universally feared. They were strong, they were resilient, they were almost impossible to break. And humans came from a death world. How had she missed this? How had the entire intelligence apparatus of the Valerie Empire missed this? She kept reading, her white eyes growing wider with each line. Earth gravity 1.0 standard units. That was heavy, much heavier than the average. The Valari homeworld had gravity of 0.7. Most spacefaring species evolved on planets with 0.6 to 0.8. Humans had evolved in conditions that would crush most other species over time. Their bones were denser, their muscles were stronger, their cardiovascular systems were built for punishment. Earth atmosphere, high oxygen content, 21%, corrosive to many materials. Many species would find it uncomfortable or even poisonous. Humans breathed it without thought. Earth climate extreme variation, temperatures ranging from minus 50 degrees to plus 50 degrees on a regular basis. Some areas experienced different weather every single day. Ice ages occurred with regularity. Mass extinction events happened every few million years. 99% of all species that had ever lived on Earth had gone extinct, and humans had survived. Earth wildlife. The words made Una's hands tighten on the console. Apex predators on every continent. Carnivores that hunted in packs. Carnivores that hunted alone. Some with claws the length of knives. Some with jaws strong enough to crush bone. Parasites that lived inside other creatures. Diseases that could kill millions in months. Venomous creatures in the water. Venomous creatures on land. Venomous creatures in the air. Insects that swarmed in billions. Plants that could kill with a touch. Humans had not evolved on a gentle world. They had evolved in hell. She searched for medical files, found detailed reports from early contact missions. Her chest felt cold as she read. Humans could survive losing limbs, could function with damaged organs. Their blood clotted quickly to prevent bleeding out. Their bones could heal after breaking. Their skin could regenerate after severe burns. They had redundant systems, backup processes, fail-safes built into their biology that allowed them to keep going when they should have died. But the most disturbing information was about their minds. When humans experience extreme pain, their brains release chemicals. Natural compounds that blocked some of the agony, that allowed them to keep moving, keep fighting, keep thinking even when their bodies were badly damaged. The reports called these chemicals adrenaline and endorphins. They described how human brains could enter a state called shock, a protective mode where pain was dulled, where impossible things became possible, where humans could function almost normally even when they should have been dead. And then there was something else, something the reports called willpower, the psychological ability to ignore what the body wanted and do what the mind decided, the capacity to keep going when everything said stop, to choose suffering over surrender. A note at the bottom of the medical file, written by a Valari scientist who had studied human physiology for years. Human pain tolerance is remarkably high compared to other species. Their ability to function under extreme stress appears to be a survival adaptation from their home planet. Human females show particularly strong resilience patterns, likely evolved from childbirth trauma over millions of years. Recommend caution when engaging humans in extended conflict. They do not surrender easily. Further research required. Una closed the files, sat in the darkness of her quarters, and let the information settle into her understanding like stones sinking into deep water. She had not been interrogating a weak creature. She had not been testing a fragile species that would break with a little pressure. She had been facing a survivor, a member of a species that had evolved specifically to endure impossible things, a species that had been forged in conditions that would have killed most other forms of life before they even developed intelligence. The Valari came from a gentle world, warm, stable, few predators, abundant resources. Their evolution had been slow and careful. They had developed civilization without having to fight for every meal, without having to survive winters that could freeze flesh solid, without having to watch for creatures in the shadows that wanted to eat them. Humans had no such luxury. Every day of their evolutionary history had been a battle. Every generation had been shaped by violence and death and the absolute necessity of endurance. They were not strong because they chose to be. They were strong because anything weaker had been eliminated by the brutal mathematics of survival. And Tessa Callahan, lying in the cell below, with her broken body and her steady eyes, was the product of millions of years of that process. She was what happened when a species learned that giving up meant death, that the only way forward was through. That pain was just another obstacle to be overcome. Una should have felt afraid, should have recognized that she was about to make a terrible mistake, should have realized that tomorrow's interrogation was not going to go the way she planned. But 40 years of certainty could not be undone by a few files. 40 years of success could not be overturned by one human prisoner. 40 years of perfect record demanded that she continue, that she prove the intelligence wrong, that she demonstrate that Commander Una could break anything, even a Death World survivor. She would simply have to work harder, be more creative, apply more pressure, use methods she normally reserved for the most resistant prisoners. It would take time. It would take effort. But in the end, the result would be the same. Everyone broke. Everyone. That was the law of interrogation. That was the truth she had learned over decades of practice. One human cargo handler would not change that, could not change that. She lay back down and closed her eyes, forced herself to sleep. Tomorrow would be difficult. She needed to be rested, needed to be sharp, needed to be at her best. Tomorrow she would break Tessa Callahan, and then everything would return to normal. The universe would make sense again. The rules would be restored. Tomorrow. But in the cell below, Tessa Callahan sat against the cold metal wall and sang quietly to herself, an old song her grandmother had taught her, a song about mountains and skiing and coming home. Her voice was weak, her body was broken, her future was uncertain, but her spirit, forged in the memory of a woman who had walked 2 months through winter to reach Montana, remained unshaken. The interrogation room waited. The crystal blade waited. The pain waited. And Tessa Callahan waited with them. Not with fear, not with despair, with the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided that she would not break, who had looked into the darkness ahead and chosen to walk forward anyway, who carried inside her the strength of everyone who had loved her, everyone who had survived impossible things, everyone who had refused to allow their spirits to be broken. The body could suffer more than anyone thought possible, The mind could endure more than anyone imagined, but the spirit her grandmother had told her could only be broken if you allowed it, and Tessa Callahan would never allow it. The interrogation room was designed to strip away hope. Cold metal walls absorbed sound, making every breath echo back distorted and alien. No windows, no variation in the harsh overhead light that never dimmed, never flickered, never offered relief. The temperature was precisely calibrated to be uncomfortable, not quite cold enough to cause hypothermia, not quite warm enough to allow relaxation. Just wrong, just hostile, just enough to remind prisoners that even the air itself was an enemy. In the center of the room stood a metal chair. It was bolted to the floor. Restraints hung from the armrests and legs like sleeping serpents waiting to strike. A collar assembly rose from the back designed to lock a prisoner's OEIS head in place so they could not look away, could not close their eyes, could not escape what was coming. Tessa Callahan sat in that chair now. The guards had carried her in. She could not walk. The broken leg would not support any weight. They had strapped her down with efficiency born from long practice. Arms locked to her sides. Right leg secured at the ankle and knee. Left leg, the broken one, positioned at an angle that made the shattered bone press hard against the inside of her skin. The collar clicked shut around her neck. Cold metal against vulnerable flesh. Two junior officers stood by the door. Young, eager, they were here to observe, to learn from the best. Commander Yuna had a reputation throughout the fleet. Prisoners lasted hours with other interrogators. Days with Yuna. She knew how to pace suffering, how to build agony into something that reshaped the mind itself. Yuna entered the room wearing her formal uniform, black fabric that seemed to drink the light. At her side hung her ceremonial blade in its crystal sheath. The blade itself was legendary. Forged from Valari crystal, the hardest material known to exist in the galaxy, it could cut through starship armor. It could slice through bone like passing through water. In 1,000 years of Empire history, no Valari crystal blade had ever been damaged, ever been dulled, ever been broken. It was not meant as a weapon. It was meant as a statement, an object lesson in the futility of resistance. Nothing could withstand Valari power. Nothing could break what the Empire had made. Yuna walked in a slow circle around Tessa. Her boots clicked against the metal floor with metronomic precision, each step identical to the last. Each sound a reminder that time here was measured, controlled, that nothing happened except by Yuna's design. She stopped in front of the prisoner and studied her face. Tessa's eyes were open, clear. The pain from the leg must have been constant, a fire burning in bone and nerve. But the prisoner's expression showed only a kind of patient attention, as if she was waiting for something inevitable, something she had already accepted. "Let us begin," Yuna said quietly. She walked another circle. Let the silence stretch. Let the anticipation build. Fear was useful. Fear made prisoners eager to talk, eager to please, eager to make the waiting end. But Tessa Callahan's breathing remained steady, slow, almost meditative. "You said you are a cargo handler," Yuna continued. Her voice was conversational, almost friendly. "But your freighter was carrying military supplies, weapons, ammunition, medical equipment for soldiers. You expect me to believe you knew nothing?" Tessa's voice was rough from thirst and damage, but the words were clear. "I loaded boxes. I didn't open them. You are lying." "I'm not." Yuna drew her blade slowly. Let the crystal catch the harsh light. It was beautiful in a dangerous way, like frozen lightning, like captured starlight sharpened to an edge that could split atoms. "This blade has cut through every material in the galaxy," she said. "Metal, stone, bone. There is nothing it cannot destroy. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Tessa looked at the blade, then back at Yuna. "Yes, just that. Nothing more. No pleading, no bargaining, just acknowledgement." "Good." Yuna placed the flat of the blade against Tessa's throat. The crystal was cold, colder than metal, colder than ice, the kind of cold that burned. Tessa's skin rose in bumps, but her breathing stayed steady. "Tell me about the Human Defense Network. Tell me about your fleet positions. Tell me about your command structure." "I don't know any of that." "You are lying." I'm not. I'm a cargo handler. I don't know military secrets. Yuna pulled the blade back, moved quickly, struck the broken leg with the flat side. Hard. Very hard. The sound was like a hammer hitting meat. Wet. Dense. Terrible. Tessa made a noise. It was short and sharp. A grunt forced out by the impact itself, by physics, by the sudden compression of lungs and diaphragm. Her hands became fists, white-knuckled, tendons standing out like cables beneath skin. Sweat appeared instantly on her forehead. A vein pulsed at her temple hard enough to see across the room. But she did not scream. The guards exchanged glances. Nervous, uncertain. Everyone screamed when struck like that. It was automatic, a reflex that could not be controlled. The body demanded it. The nervous system required it. Pain that intense had to be expressed, had to escape somehow. Holding it in was supposed to be impossible. Yuna struck again. Harder. The bones shifted, moved. Something inside made a cracking sound as fractures spread through already damaged tissue. Tessa's entire body went rigid, her jaw locked so tight that muscles bulged along her cheeks. Her eyes squeezed shut. Tears leaked from the corners and ran down through dirt and dried blood. But still, no scream. Scream, Yuna demanded, her own voice rising. Cry, beg, do something. Tessa opened her eyes, looked directly at Yuna, and through the tears and the sweat and the agony written in every line of her face, she smiled. It was a horrible smile, full of pain, but also full of something that looked like triumph. My people have a saying, she whispered through clenched teeth. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. She spat blood onto the floor. You're just making me stronger. Yuna struck again, and again. She hit the broken leg, the ribs, the shoulders. After 30 minutes, Tessa's body was a landscape of bruises and cuts. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds. Her breathing was ragged and uneven. The restraints creaked with the tension of her locked muscles. But she had not screamed. Not once. The junior officers stood frozen by the door. They looked afraid. They had seen many interrogations. They had watched Commander Yuna break prisoners in hours, had seen hardened warriors reduced to sobbing children begging for mercy. But they had never seen anything like this, had never seen someone endure what should have been unendurable. Yuna finally stepped back. Her hands were shaking slightly. She told herself it was from exertion, from swinging the blade so many times. But in the deepest part of her mind, the part she tried never to acknowledge, she knew the truth. She was shaking because she was beginning to realize that this human was different, that Tessa Callahan might be something she had never faced before, an enemy that could not be broken by pain alone. Why do you resist? She asked. Her voice was calmer now, but there was confusion underneath the control. Real confusion. You have nothing to protect. You know no secrets. There is no reason for you to suffer like this. Tessa raised her head. It took tremendous effort. Her whole body was shaking now, trembling with shock and blood loss and agony. But her voice, when it came, was clear. You're wrong. I have everything to protect. What do you have? My dignity, my humanity, the knowledge that I never gave in. She smiled again, teeth red with blood. You can damage my body, but you cannot destroy who I am. Yuna stood very still. She had heard prisoners say such things before. They all said them at the beginning, but they all broke in the end. The body was weak. The mind was weaker. No one could resist forever. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. But looking into Tessa Callahan's dark brown eyes, bloodshot and filled with tears, but somehow still defiant, Yuna felt doubt creep in like frost spreading across glass. We will continue tomorrow, she said. Her voice was firm, controlled, giving away nothing. You will have time to think about your choices. She turned toward the door. The guards opened it immediately. Grateful to leave, grateful to escape the tension that filled the room like smoke. Hey, Tessa called out. Her voice was weak but steady. Yuna stopped, did not turn around. My grandmother survived worse than you, Tessa said. Much worse, for 18 months. You've had me one day. She paused. You'll have to do better than this. Yuna walked out without responding. The door sealed behind her with a heavy sound. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold metal until they stopped, until control returned, until the mask of certainty settled back into place. Behind the sealed door, Tessa sat in the chair and let her head hang forward as much as the collar allowed. Everything hurt. Everything burned. Her body felt like it was made of broken glass held together by wire. But inside, beneath the pain, she held onto something that the interrogation could not touch. The memory of grandmother Maggie walking through snow, walking through bombed cities, walking home because giving up was not an option, had never been an option. She would not dishonor that memory by breaking now. The next 2 days blurred together into a continuous nightmare of calculated suffering. Una tried heat. She sealed Tessa in a chamber where the temperature climbed until skin blistered and lungs burned with every breath. Left her there for hours while the prisoner's body tried desperately to cool itself. Tried and failed. But when the chamber door finally opened and Una asked her questions, Tessa only shook her head. Whispered through cracked lips, "I don't know anything." She tried cold, strapped Tessa to a metal table and flooded the room with freezing gas until ice crystals formed on exposed skin, until hypothermia made thought difficult and shivers became convulsions. But when the temperature finally returned to normal and Una demanded information, Tessa simply repeated her serial number, over and over, like a prayer, like an anchor to hold on to when everything else was slipping away. She tried electric shocks, precise jolts of current through nerve clusters, through pressure points, through places where pain was magnified 100-fold. Tessa's body arced against the restraints. Her muscles locked. Her heart skipped beats. But she did not speak, did not reveal anything except the sounds that agony forced from her throat against her will. Grunts, gasps, but never words, never information. She tried the sleep deprivation, kept Tessa awake for 50 hours straight. Every time her eyes started to close, alarms blared and lights flashed, and guards shocked her back to consciousness. The human mind began to fragment without rest. Hallucinations started. Reality became uncertain. But even then, even when Tessa could barely remember her own name, she held on to the protocol. Callahan Tessa, serial 778-32-9941. On the third day, Una broke Tessa's right leg. The left one was already shattered beyond repair. The right one had been her good leg, her last connection to mobility, to the possibility of escape, to the idea that her body might someday work normally again. The procedure was clinical. Tessa strapped down, Una using a metal rod to deliver precise impacts to the femur just above the knee. 3 strikes. The first created a hairline fracture. The second spread it. The third broke through completely. The sound was unmistakable, like a green branch snapping, like something fundamental giving way. Tessa's scream came then. Finally, after 3 days of silence, after countless injuries and endless pain, the scream tore out of her throat with a sound that made the guards flinch, made the junior officers look away, made even Commander Una pause for just a moment. But it was not a scream of surrender. It was not a scream of breaking. It was a scream of pure rage, of fury that her body had betrayed her, that the reflex had overcome control, that something had been taken from her against her will. When the scream ended, Tessa looked at Una with eyes that burned with something beyond pain, beyond fear, something that looked like absolute determination mixed with cold fury. "That's one," she said through gritted teeth. "You got 1 scream in 3 days. Are you proud?" Una did not answer. She simply had the guards return Tessa to her cell. As they dragged the prisoner away, both legs now useless trailing behind like broken branches, Una stood alone in the interrogation room and tried to understand what was happening. She pulled up the medical scanner data on her personal pad. The numbers made no sense. Tessa Callahan should be dead. The blood loss alone should have killed her. The shock from repeated trauma should have stopped her heart. The compound fractures in both legs were infected now. Tissue was dying. Organs were beginning to fail as toxins built up in the bloodstream. The human body could only take so much damage before systems started cascading towards shutdown. But Tessa was still conscious, still aware, still resisting. That night, Lieutenant Dova came to Una's quarters with an updated medical report. Dova was young but competent, one of the few officers on the Eclipse that Una actually respected. She did not panic. She did not exaggerate. She reported facts. Commander, Dova said quietly, I have the latest readings from the prisoner. Report. Dova's voice was uncertain. Her body is failing. The medical scanner says she will die within 2 days without treatment. Yuna nodded. That was expected. That was what should happen. But, Dova paused. Her vital signs are stable. Her brain activity is normal. She is conscious and alert. Explain. I cannot, Commander. Dova looked genuinely disturbed. She should not be awake. The amount of damage she has sustained, the trauma to her system, the infection spreading through her tissue. It should be impossible. By every medical standard, we understand she should be in a coma or dead. Yuna stared at the datapad, read the numbers again. They had not changed. Humans are not weak, Commander, Dova said carefully. Whatever our intelligence reports said, they were wrong. Humans are strong in ways we did not recognize, ways we do not understand. Yuna dismissed Dova, sat alone in her quarters and thought about death worlds, about species that evolved in hell, about creatures that survived because anything less adapted had been eliminated by the brutal mathematics of natural selection. She thought about Tessa Callahan and her grandmother walking through winter, about 18 months in an enemy camp and 2 months walking home. She was beginning to understand that she had made a fundamental error, not in her technique, not in her methods, but in her assumptions. She had assumed that humans were like other species, that they could be broken the same way, that pain and fear were universal languages that always produced the same results. But humans were not like other species. They were survivors from a world that killed almost everything it touched. They were the descendants of creatures that had learned to endure because endurance was the only path forward. They had been shaped by millions of years of pressure into something that could not be broken by a few days of torture. The realization should have made Yuna change tactics, should have made her stop, should have made her see that this interrogation was pointless, that Tessa Callahan knew nothing worth knowing, that keeping her alive was a waste of resources. But 40 years of success would not allow her to admit failure, would not allow her to stop. She had never given up on a prisoner before, had never admitted that someone was beyond breaking, and she would not start now. Tomorrow she would try the chemical interrogation. Drugs that loosened inhibitions, that made lying difficult, that stripped away the layers of control and left only raw truth exposed. Tomorrow she would break Tessa Callahan, or die trying. But in the cell below, something unexpected was happening. At 3 a.m. ship's time, when most of the crew was sleeping, Yuna was walking the corridors again. Restless, unable to quiet her mind. She found herself drawn toward the detention level without consciously deciding to go there. Her feet simply carried her through the dimly lit passages until she stood outside cell 7. And that was when she heard it, singing. The voice was weak, rough, damaged by days of screaming and thirst and trauma. But it was unmistakably singing, a melody that rose and fell with surprising clarity. Words in English, a language she understood. Yuna stepped closer to the force field, looked through the shimmering barrier at the prisoner inside. Tessa was sitting against the wall, both legs stretched out in front of her. Useless, broken. The infections had spread. Dark lines ran up from the wounds like veins of poison spreading through flesh. Her face was gray. Her eyes were sunken. She looked like death itself. But she was singing, a folk song about mountains and rivers, about sky and earth, about going home. Her voice cracked on some of the notes, wavered on others, but the melody continued, steady, defiant, refusing to be silenced. 3 guards stood nearby, watching. Their expressions were a mixture of awe and fear. They had seen prisoners beg. They had seen prisoners cry. They had seen prisoners break in every way that breaking was possible, but they had never seen a prisoner sing. The song ended. Tessa opened her eyes and saw Yuna standing outside the cell. She did not look surprised, did not look afraid, just looked, patient, waiting. You came, Tessa said. Her voice was barely a whisper now. I was hoping you would. Yuna found her own voice. Why are you singing, poem? Because I can. Tessa smiled. It was a gentle smile, not defiant, not angry, just peaceful. You've taken everything else, my body, my health, my freedom. But you can't take my voice, so I sing. You are dying. I know. And yet you sing. Especially because I'm dying. Tessa shifted slightly against the wall. The movement clearly caused tremendous pain, but her voice remained steady. Where I come from, there's a tradition. When someone knows they're going to die, they don't cry. They don't beg. They sing. They remember the good things. They celebrate what they had. Yuna stepped closer to the force field. You have nothing to celebrate. You are a prisoner. You are alone, Siang. Your ship was destroyed. No one knows you are here. Tessa laughed. It turned into a cough. Blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. But when she looked at Yuna again, she was still smiling. You're wrong about everything. She touched her chest over her heart. I'm not alone. I'm never alone. My grandmother is here. My parents, my friends, my brothers and sisters from the Corps. Everyone who ever loved me. They're all here. Inside me. You can't take them away. She paused, took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice carried absolute certainty. And you're wrong about something else. You think no one knows I'm here. But my ship sent a distress signal before it was destroyed. My people know I was taken. Her dark eyes locked onto Yuna's glowing white ones. They're coming. They will not find this ship. We are too far from human space. You don't know my people. Tessa's smile widened slightly. Blood stained her teeth. They'll search every star in this sector. They'll track every ion trail. They'll find this ship. She leaned her head back against the wall, closed her eyes. And when they do, she whispered, you'll see what humans can really do. Yuna stood frozen. She wanted to tell Tessa she was wrong, wanted to say that no rescue would come, that she would die alone in this cell, that her defiance meant nothing. But looking at the prisoner's face, seeing the absolute conviction there, she could not speak. Instead, she turned to the guards. Increase sensor coverage, she ordered. Her voice was sharp, controlled. Full power to detection arrays. I want to know if anything enters this sector. Anything. The guards saluted and moved to comply. Yuna took one last look at Tessa Callahan sitting in the cell. Broken, dying, still singing softly under her breath. Then she walked away. But the cold feeling in her chest grew stronger with every step. 48 hours passed, the longest 48 hours of Yuna's career. The medical reports grew worse. Tessa's organs were shutting down. The infections had spread to her bloodstream. Sepsis was setting in. The scanner gave her less than 24 hours, maybe less than 12. Death was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty, but she remained conscious, alert. She sang when she had the strength. She spoke when the guards came to check on her. She told them stories about Montana, about mountains in Skau, about a grandmother who had survived a war, about the people who would come looking for her. The guards started to believe her. Yuna could see it in their eyes, the way they glanced at sensor displays, the way they moved through corridors with new nervousness, the way they whispered to each other when they thought she could not hear. The prisoner had gotten into their heads. Her certainty had infected them like a virus. They were afraid now, not of Tessa, but of what might be coming. Yuna spent the time on the bridge, watching the sensors herself, telling herself that nothing would come, that the human distress signal had been lost in the vast emptiness of space, that no one could track a ship that had jumped to faster than light speeds hours after the attack. That rescue was impossible, but she kept watching anyway. The alert came at the worst possible time. Yuna was in her quarters, trying to sleep, trying to silence the voice in her head that kept singing about mountains and home. The klaxons tore through her attempted rest like claws through fabric, sharp, urgent, demanding. She was running before her eyes fully opened, through corridors, to the bridge, officers scrambling at their stations, screens lighting up with data, the main display showing 3 bright points of light moving fast. Too fast. Report, Yuna commanded. Dova turned from her station. Her face was pale, frightened. 3 human vessels, Commander. They appeared from nowhere. They must have been hiding behind the asteroid field, under some kind of stealth technology. Size armament. Smaller than us, much smaller. Dova checked her readings twice. as if she could not believe what she was seeing. But Commander, they're moving at speeds we've never seen from human ships. The 3 points of light on the display were growing larger, accelerating. They're not slowing down, another officer reported, voice rising with panic. At this speed, they cannot stop in time to engage. They would crash directly into us. They would die. Yuna watched the display, watched the 3 ships approaching with impossible velocity, watched them refuse to decelerate, refuse to veer away, refuse to do anything except come straight at the eclipse like missiles. And in that moment, she understood. They were not planning to stop. They were not planning to fight in any conventional way. They were planning to crash, to sacrifice themselves, to die. For one cargo handler, for one prisoner who knew nothing important, for Tessa Callahan. Evasive maneuvers, Una shouted. I wish get by my him. All power to engines, get us out of their path. The eclipse began to turn, slowly, too slowly. Valeri ships were built for power, for overwhelming force, not for speed, not for agility. The human ships were coming too fast. On the main display, Una could see them clearly now. Small vessels, barely larger than fighters, each one marked with human symbols, each one carrying a crew that had just signed their own death warrants. They're coming for her, Una whispered. The first impact shook the entire ship like a hammer striking an anvil. Lights flickered. Gravity fluctuated. Somewhere far below, alarms began to scream. Hull breach sections 40 through 47, someone shouted. We've lost 2 engines. The second impact followed before the ship could stabilize. This one hit the hangar bay. The explosion that followed was massive, consuming, turning metal and flesh into superheated plasma in an instant. Hangar destroyed, 200 casualties. Una gripped her command chair, watched the third ship approach, watched it aim directly for the bridge, directly for her. All hands abandon bridge, everyone out. Now. Officers ran, scrambled, fought to reach the exits. Una was the last, always the last. She looked back at the main display one final time, saw the human ship fill the screen, saw the moment of impact. Then the world became fire and noise, and the terrible sound of everything breaking at once. She was thrown through the air, hit a wall, then the floor, then something else, could not tell what. Her ears rang with a sound like bells made of breaking glass. Her vision blurred red. The smell of smoke and burning flesh filled her lungs. When she could see again, the bridge was gone. Simply gone. The entire front section of the eclipse had been torn away. Emergency doors had sealed the breach. But the ship was dying. Power failing. Systems cascading toward catastrophic failure. And then she heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Gunfire, coming from inside the ship. Dova's voice crackled over her personal communicator. Broken, terrified. They're inside, Commander. The human ships weren't trying to destroy us. They were trying to create entry points. Soldiers came out of the wreckage. They're fighting through the ship. How many? At least 30, maybe more. Dova's voice rose with fear. Commander, we hit them. We shot them. They won't stop. One of them took a blade through the shoulder and kept fighting. Another lost an arm and just kept shooting with the other hand. Una pushed herself to her feet. Her leg was injured, possibly broken, but she could still walk, could still move. Where are they now? They've reached the detention level. They're cutting through the doors. Of course they were. Una had known from the moment she understood. Known from the moment 3 ships appeared on sensors moving at suicidal speeds. Known from the moment Tessa Callahan had said with absolute certainty, they're coming. They were coming for her. They were coming for their cargo handler. And Commander Una, who had spent 40 years breaking prisoners, was about to learn what happened when you hurt someone that humanity valued. She began to run through damaged corridors, past fires, past bodies, past the ruins of her perfect ship, running toward the detention level, running toward the sound of gunfire, running toward the inevitable confrontation with an enemy she had underestimated in every possible way. Behind her, what remained of the eclipse continued to die. Ahead of her, Tessa Callahan sat in her cell and listened to the sounds of rescue approaching, and smiled. The detention level was filled with smoke. It drifted through corridors in thick gray clouds that burned the lungs and stung the eyes. Emergency lighting flickered red and uncertain. Somewhere distant, fire alarms screamed. The eclipse was dying around them. Its systems failing one by one, its proud hull breached in 3 places by ships that had chosen death over retreat. Una ran through the chaos. Her injured legs sent lightning bolts of pain up her spine with every step. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead. Her perfect uniform was torn and stained. But none of that mattered. Only one thing mattered now: reaching Cell 7 before the humans did. Stopping them. Proving that she was still in control. That she had not been defeated by a cargo handler's prediction. The sound of gunfire grew louder, closer. She could hear the distinctive crack of human weapons. Different from Volari plasma rifles, sharper, more brutal. The sound of chemical propellants hurling metal at supersonic speeds. Primitive technology, but effective. Bodies of her crew lined the corridors, some still moving, most not. She rounded a corner and stopped. The final door to the detention block was falling. Human soldiers in black armor surrounded it. They had placed some kind of cutting device against the metal. White-hot plasma traced geometric patterns across the surface. The door was thick, reinforced, designed to withstand assault. But it was failing, melting. The patterns grew deeper with every passing second. Through the smoke, Una counted 30 soldiers, maybe more. They moved with practiced efficiency. Weapons up, covering angles, watching for threats. These were not civilians. These were warriors. Trained, experienced, deadly. Several of them were wounded. One had a makeshift bandage wrapped around his shoulder where a plasma bolt had burned through armor. Another was missing his left arm below the elbow. The stump was sealed with emergency medical foam that had hardened into a grotesque yellow mass. But he held his rifle steady in his remaining hand. Ready, unwavering. Una understood then what Lieutenant Dova had tried to explain. These humans would not stop, could not stop. They had come too far, sacrificed too much. 3 ships and their crews destroyed. Dozens of soldiers killed fighting through the eclipse. They had paid a price in blood that demanded completion. They would reach Tessa Callahan, or they would die trying. There was no third option. The door fell, collapsed inward with a sound like thunder. The soldiers moved immediately, flowing through the opening like water, smooth, coordinated, a machine made of flesh and determination. Una drew her crystal blade. The weapon caught the red emergency light and threw it back in sharp prismatic fragments. She stepped into the center of the corridor, directly in their path, directly between them and their objective. Her voice cut through the smoke and noise with absolute authority. "You want your prisoner. You will have to go through me." The soldiers stopped, weapons raised. Targeting lasers painted red dots across Una's chest and head. 20 different fingers on 20 different triggers. She would be dead before she hit the floor. Before her brain even registered the shots. Dead before she could blink. But she did not flinch. Did not step aside. She had spent 40 years earning her reputation. She would not surrender it in the final moments. One soldier stepped forward, larger than the others, broader across the shoulders. The armor was marked with rank insignia, a captain. The helmet was equipped with a clear faceplate. Through it, Una could see a man's face, weathered, scarred, maybe 45 years old. His eyes were pale blue, cold, but there was something else in them, something that looked like controlled fury. He held a rifle in one hand. In the other, he carried a simple metal bar, approximately 1 meter long, 2 centimeters in diameter. Just steel, nothing special, nothing enhanced. The kind of tool a mechanic might use, or a soldier who needed something to break through doors. The man stopped 3 meters from Una. His voice was deep, rough. The voice of someone who had shouted orders across battlefields and through the chaos of combat. "Move aside, Commander. I will not ask twice." Una raised her blade. "Let it catch the light. Let them all see what they were facing. I am Commander Una of the Volari Empire. I do not move aside for anyone." The soldier looked past her, through the smoke and the broken doorway, into the detention block beyond. Una knew what he saw. Cell 7, force field still active, and inside Tessa Callahan. Broken, dying, but somehow still breathing. The soldier's expression changed. The cold fury became something hotter, something more dangerous. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck stood out like steel cables. You did this to her. It was not a question. She refused to cooperate. The soldier handed his rifle to the man beside him, stepped forward, holding only the metal bar. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a predator closing distance with prey that could not escape. My name is Captain Garrett Hendricks. Tessa Callahan served under my command in Afghanistan. She saved my life twice. His voice was quiet but carried like thunder. Once in Kandahar when our convoy was ambushed. She carried 3 wounded Marines through 2 kilometers of enemy fire to reach extraction. I was one of them. I had shrapnel in my spine, could not walk, could barely breathe. She threw me over her shoulders and ran. He was 5 meters away now. 4, 3. The second time was in Baghdad. IED destroyed our vehicle. I was trapped under burning metal. She pulled me out, burned her hands to the bone doing it. Spent 6 months in physical therapy afterward. Never complained, never asked for recognition, just did what needed doing. 2 meters. She received the Silver Star, turned it down, said she was just doing her job, just taking care of her brothers. Hendricks stopped directly in front of Una, close enough that she could see the scars on his face, old burn marks across his left cheek, a line across his forehead where something sharp had passed too close. So I am going to teach you something, Commander. I am going to teach you what happens when you hurt one of ours. Una attacked. She was fast. 40 years of training, 40 years of combat, 40 years of killing. The blade moved like liquid light, faster than thought, faster than reaction. The edge that could cut through starship armor, the crystal that had never been damaged in 1,000 years. She aimed for the throat. A killing strike. Quick, clean, final. Hendricks raised his left hand, bare, unarmored, just flesh and bone. The crystal blade hit his palm. It cut deep. The edge was sharper than anything nature had ever produced, sharper than evolution could create. It sliced through skin and muscle like they were made of water. Blood sprayed across Una's face. Hot, red, human. But Hendricks did not scream, did not pull back, did not show pain. His fingers closed around the blade, wrapped around the crystal that nothing could damage. His hand tightened, squeezed. The blood made his grip slippery, but he held on, held firm. His knuckles went white. The tendons in his forearms stood out like ropes under tension. There was a sound, soft at first, then growing. A crystalline note, high-pitched, rising. The sound of structure under impossible stress. The sound of molecular bonds stretching past their breaking point. The sound of the impossible becoming reality. The Valari crystal blade shattered. It did not crack, did not chip. It exploded, burst into 1,000 glittering fragments that fell like snow made of knives. Pieces embedded themselves in the walls, the floor, Una's uniform. But the largest shards remained clutched in Hendrix's bleeding hand. Una stared. Her mind could not process what she had just witnessed. The blade was unbreakable. That was not opinion. That was fact. Physical law, a truth as fundamental as gravity or light. Valari crystal could not be destroyed, could not be damaged, could not fail, but it lay in pieces on the floor. Proof that facts could be wrong, that laws could be broken. That truth was negotiable when confronted with sufficient will. Hendricks opened his hand, let the fragments fall. His palm was torn open, cut to the bone. Blood dripped steadily onto the metal floor. But his voice was steady, calm, like he was explaining something simple to someone slow to understand. That is the thing about humans, Commander. We don't break easy. Our bodies don't. Our spirits don't. He stepped closer, and our bonds don't. When you hurt one of us, the rest of us come running. We crash our ships. We sacrifice our lives. We walk through fire, because that is what family does. He raised the metal bar, not threatening, just ready. Hendricks swung. The bar caught Una in the center of her chest. The impact lifted her off her feet, threw her backward. She hit the wall with enough force to crack the metal. Crack ribs, collapsed lungs. She slid down and crumpled at the base. Could not breathe. Could not move. Could only watch as Hendricks turned away from her as if she no longer mattered. As if she had already ceased to exist. "Get Callahan," he ordered. His voice carried absolute authority. "Gentle. She is in bad shape." 4 soldiers moved past Una, into the detention block, toward cell 7. She tried to rise, tried to stop them, but her body would not obey. Air would not come. The world was graying at the edges, fading. Through dimming vision, she watched the soldiers deactivate the force field, watched them enter the cell, watched them kneel beside Tessa Callahan with a gentleness that seemed impossible from warriors who had just killed their way through an entire ship. They lifted her carefully, supporting her broken legs, cradling her head. One soldier removed his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Another opened a medical kit and started an IV line. They moved like medics, like family, like people who would give anything to ease her suffering. They carried Tessa past Una, past the commander who had spent 4 days trying to break her, past the interrogator who had failed, past the enemy who had finally learned that some things cannot be destroyed by pain alone. Tessa's eyes found Una's. For a moment, their gazes locked. The prisoner and the interrogator, the survivor and the defeated. Tessa was barely conscious, more dead than alive. Her skin was gray, her breathing was shallow, her body was a ruin, but she smiled, faint, weak, triumphant. "Told you," she whispered. The words were almost inaudible, but in the sudden quiet they carried like thunder. They came, then she was gone, carried away by soldiers who had sacrificed everything to reach her, carried toward safety, toward medical care, toward home. Una lay on the floor and listened to their boots fade away, listened to the eclipse groan and shudder around her as systems continued to fail, listened to the sound of her own labored breathing. She had captured a prisoner. She had interrogated her. She had tortured her. She had tried to break her. And in doing so, she had made an enemy of humanity. Una woke in chains. She was lying in a bed, clean white sheets, soft pillow. Medical equipment beeped quietly nearby. The room was small but comfortable. Temperature pleasant, lighting gentle. Through a window she could see stars. Not the stars visible from Valari space. Different constellations. Human space. Her chest no longer hurt. She took a breath and felt no pain. The ribs had been repaired. The internal bleeding stopped. Someone had treated her injuries with the same care they would give their own wounded. The irony was not lost on her. The chains were not heavy, just symbolic. Restraints on her wrists connected to the bed frame, enough to prevent escape, but not enough to cause discomfort. They had not hurt her, had not tortured her, had not treated her the way she had treated Tessa Callahan. The door opened. Captain Hendricks entered. His left hand was wrapped in white bandages, the wound from catching her blade, the injury that should have crippled him, that should have severed tendons and destroyed nerves and left the hand useless forever. But he moved the fingers, flexed them. They worked. Human medical technology had repaired what should have been permanent damage. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. His pale blue eyes studied her face without expression. Not hostile, not friendly, just evaluating. "You are awake. Good. We need to talk." Una's voice was rough from disuse. "What do you want?" "Information. The same thing you wanted from Callahan." "I will tell you nothing." Hendricks smiled. It was not a kind smile. "That is what she said too. 4 days you had her. You used every torture technique your empire knows, and she told you nothing." He leaned forward. "I wonder if you can do what she did. I wonder if you are strong enough." Una pulled against the chains. They did not move. "You think I am weak. You think I will break where she did not. I think you have never been tested." Hendricks stood and walked to the window, looked out at the stars. 4 days. Do you understand what 4 days of that kind of torture does to a human body, to a human mind? He turned back to face her. Una remembered the 3rd day, the second leg breaking, the single scream that had torn from Tessa's throat. "That's 1 scream in 3 days. Are you proud?" The fury in those eyes, the absolute refusal to surrender. That should have been the moment Una stopped. That should have been when she understood. But pride had blinded her, and now she paid the price. Hendricks' voice brought her back to the present. "She is a good woman. An ordinary woman trying to live a quiet life after serving with honor, and you nearly killed her. Una found her voice. She was a prisoner of war. I was following protocol. She was a civilian. Her ship was carrying humanitarian supplies. Her ship was in a military convoy. Her ship was in a merchant convoy that had hired 2 defense ships as escort. Standard practice in dangerous space. You did not even check the cargo manifests. You did not verify what she was carrying. You just assumed. Hendricks leaned closer. Do you know what was in those containers? She loaded medical equipment for a colony hospital, food for refugees, water purification systems for settlements that were struggling, not weapons, not ammunition, just supplies to help people survive. Una felt something unfamiliar. It might have been guilt, might have been shame. She pushed it down. How is she? Hendricks was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Alive. Barely. Our doctors are working on her now. They say she will never walk properly again. The damage to her legs is too severe. Both femurs shattered. Infection destroyed significant tissue. Nerve damage that cannot be fully repaired. He paused. She will have pain for the rest of her life. Chronic, constant, some days worse than others, but always there. I was following orders. So was everyone who ever did something terrible. Hendricks shook his head. But that is not what I came here to discuss. I came to give you a choice. Una met his eyes. What choice? Well, you can tell us about the Volari Defense Network, ship positions, weapon capabilities, communication codes, fleet movements, everything you know. He held up his bandaged hand before she could respond. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking you will resist. You are thinking you will be as strong as Callahan was. You are thinking you will prove that Volari are just as tough as humans. His smile was cold now, colder than space. You are wrong. We are not going to torture you. We do not do that. Humans learned a long time ago that torture does not work. People will say anything to make the pain stop. They will lie. They will invent information. They will tell you what they think you want to hear. Most of it is useless. It is a waste of time and resources. It is ineffective. Una was confused. Then what will you do? Nothing. Hendricks sat back down. We are going to keep you here. We are going to bed you, give you medical care, treat you with basic dignity, and then we are going to send you home. While Hendricks stood and walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Because I want you to deliver a message. What message? We know what your empire is planning. We know you are preparing to invade human space. We have been monitoring your fleet movements for months. We know you think we are weak, that we will be easy to conquer, that our scattered colonies and limited military will not be able to stop you. He turned to face her fully. We want you to tell them what you saw here. Tell them about Callahan who did not break. Tell them about our rescue team who crashed their ships to save one cargo handler. Tell them about me breaking your unbreakable blade with my bare hand. His voice grew harder, stronger, each word carrying weight like stones. And tell them this, if they come for us, they will lose. Not because we have better weapons, not because we have more ships, not because we have superior technology. They will lose because we will never give up, ever. We will fight for every inch. We will vie for every inch. We will make them pay in blood for every inch they take. We will turn every planet into a fortress, every city into a battlefield, every home into a bunker. We will fight until the last human is dead, and even then the survivors will keep fighting. He opened the door. We will not surrender. We will not negotiate. We will not accept defeat. Your empire can win battles. They can destroy ships. They can kill millions. But they cannot break us. No one can break us. They will not believe me, Una said quietly. Hendricks paused in the doorway. One will not, but some will. And those who believe will convince others. And eventually your empire will understand what they are dealing with. They will understand that attacking humanity is not like attacking other species. That we come from a world that tried to kill us for millions of years and failed. And if they attack anyway, Hendricks' eyes were sad now, but still strong, still certain. Then we will prove it the hard way. He left. The door closed, locked. Una lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling. Thought about Tessa singing in her cell. Thought about Hendricks breaking crystal with his hand. Thought about soldiers crashing ships without hesitation to save one person. She thought about her own empire, her own fleet, her own commanders. Would they do the same? Would any of them sacrifice themselves to save a single prisoner? Would they crash their ships? Would they walk through fire? Would they fight against impossible odds for one of their own? She knew the answer, and it frightened her more than anything else that had happened. The Volari fought for power, for territory, for glory, for the empire. But they did not fight for each other. They did not die for each other. They did not consider individual lives worth sacrificing for. The collective was everything. The individual was nothing. Humans were different. Humans formed bonds that transcended logic. They valued individuals above efficiency. They would break every rule and sacrifice everything for someone they called family. Even if that person was not related by blood. Even if that person was just a cargo handler they had served with years ago. That connection made them vulnerable. It meant they could be hurt by attacking the people they loved. But it also made them dangerous in ways the Volari could never match. It made them willing to endure anything, to sacrifice everything. Una closed her eyes. She had a message to deliver. She was not sure anyone would listen. The high command was arrogant, certain of Volari's superiority, convinced that victory was inevitable. They would dismiss her report, call her weak, say she had been compromised by captivity, say the humans had broken her. But some would listen. Some would look at the data from the battle, at the speed of the human ships, at the ferocity of the soldiers, at the impossible endurance of the prisoner. Some would realize that the intelligence reports were wrong, that humans were not weak, that they were dangerous in ways that standard military analysis could not measure, and those few might be enough to prevent a war that the Volari Empire would regret starting. 1 week later, Una was released, escorted to a neutral zone, transferred to a Volari pickup ship. The journey back to Empire space took 3 weeks. She had much time to think. 3 months after that, Commander Una stood before the Volari High Command. 9 admirals sitting in judgment. 9 leaders of the most powerful empire in the sector. 9 voices that would decide the fate of billions. She delivered her report. Every detail, every observation, every moment of the interrogation, the torture, the resistance, the rescue, the blade breaking, the message. When she finished, there was silence. Long, uncomfortable. Then the questions began. Harsh, skeptical, accusatory. They did not want to believe her. Did not want to accept that their intelligence was wrong, that their assumptions were flawed, that humans were dangerous. But some listened. Some looked at the battle data, at the casualties, at the wreckage of the Eclipse, at the speed and ferocity of the human attack, at the medical scans of Tessa Callahan showing injuries that should have killed her, at the recorded footage of Hendricks breaking crystal with his bare hand. Some realized that Una was telling the truth. 3 weeks later, with no announcement and no explanation, the Volari High Command removed human space from their expansion target list. The invasion plans were filed away. The fleet movements were redirected. The war that would have killed millions was quietly canceled. Lieutenant Dova had survived the battle, though barely. She had been in engineering when the first ship struck, had authorized Una's medical treatment before the humans took her into custody, a final act of loyalty. When Una returned, Dova requested transfer to a different ship. The memories were too much. Una approved the transfer without hesitation. The Eclipse was beyond repair. The Volari Navy classified it as a total loss. Its wreckage served as a reminder of the cost of underestimating an enemy. 47 soldiers had boarded the Eclipse during the rescue operation. 23 had died in the fighting. 3 ship crews, 19 men and women total, had perished in the initial kamikaze strikes. For one cargo handler, 66 humans had paid the ultimate price, and they would do it again without hesitation. On Earth, the story spread. News networks picked it up. Social media exploded. The tale of the cargo handler who had refused to break. The woman who had been tortured for 4 days and never surrendered. The Marine who had saved lives and asked for no recognition. The survivor who had proven that determination could outlast cruelty. They called her the Unbreakable. Tessa hated it. She just wanted to be left alone, to recover in peace, to rebuild her life quietly. But the story was bigger than her now. It belonged to humanity. It was a message to the galaxy. 6 months after her rescue, Tessa took her first steps with the cane at the rehabilitation center outside Denver. Mountains visible through the windows. Captain Hendricks walked beside her, ready to catch her if she fell, ready to help if she needed it. She did not fall, did not ask for help. She walked across the floor with gritted teeth and tears streaming down her face. Walked because giving up was not an option. Walked because her grandmother had walked through snow. Walked because that was what survivors did. At the end of the room, she turned, looked back at where she had started. 20 meters. Not much, but everything. Again, she said. Hendricks smiled. Again. They walked back, and again, day after day, week after week, until the 20 meters became 50. Then 100, then a kilometer. The pain never left. The limp never disappeared. But she walked, she moved, she lived. 1 year after her capture, on a clear autumn day when the aspens were turning gold, Tessa stood on a hillside in Montana, the ranch where her grandmother had lived, where Maggie Callahan had returned after walking through winter, where stories of survival had been passed down through generations. The wind was cold, the sky was clear, mountains rose in the distance, blue and white and eternal. Tessa leaned on her cane and looked at the grave. Simple stone, simple words. Margaret Maggie Callahan, 1924-2018. She walked home. I walked too, grandmother, Tessa whispered. Not as far as you, not through snow, but I walked, and I did not break, just like you taught me. The wind carried her words away, up toward the mountains, up toward the sky. She turned and walked back down the hill. Each step hurt. Each step reminded her of what she had endured. But she walked, because that was what humans did, what they had always done. They survived. Across the galaxy on a Valari ship in Valari space, Commander Una stood at a window and looked at the stars. She thought about Tessa Callahan singing in a cell, about Garrett Hendricks breaking the unbreakable, about soldiers who crashed their ships to save one person. She thought about the choice her empire had made, to step back, to avoid war, to choose survival over conquest. It was the right choice. She knew that now. Knew it with the certainty of someone who had seen the truth, had felt it, had been changed by it. Humans were not weak. They were not easy prey. They were survivors from a death world, warriors forged by millions of years of struggle. And the Valari Empire, for all its power and pride, was not ready to face that kind of enemy. Perhaps they never would be. Una turned away from the window, went back to her duties, carried the memory with her like a scar that would never fully heal. The memory of a woman with broken legs and steady eyes. The memory of a voice singing about mountains and home. The memory of learning that some things cannot be destroyed. Not by pain, not by fear, not by torture, not by anything except choice. And Tessa Callahan had chosen to survive.